Welcome to the Love Pod, where inspiration, vision, and real connection come alive. Wherever you are, you belong here.
Welcome to the Love Pod, everyone. I am your host today, Nathaniel. I'm super pleased to be welcoming Clemens Hackmack, who is the fretboard artist, school community builder, inspiring musician, and teacher. And Clem, I know you're in Vienna now, and I know music is core part of your purpose and your mission in life to bring people to a deeper connection with themselves. I remember feeling really inspired by the classroom in your community, all about, just the simple micro practice of even just doing 2 minutes a day of music and how important that is for brain function. I'm really pleased to have you on the show. I'd love to just welcome you to introduce more of who you are and why is this such a passion in your life?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me, Nathaniel. It's really a great thing. It's actually the first podcast I've done in this way, apart from like band interviews and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Basically, to start off, like one thing at least, when you talk about the 2 minute trick, I was like, or let's say, the whole way of I focus on teaching my students how to play guitar on a daily basis. The one thing that really struck me when researching on that, for instance, is like the amount of positive effects making music has actually on the brain and on the body. I'm no scientist in these regards specifically, but I know also from my own experience, like the way it can shift a mental state, so to speak, is actually pretty mind-blowing. And I have not known, for instance, that making music really connects the hemispheres in the brain in ways that is observed with barely anything else, I think, really. And that was for me, for instance, that just flipped the whole script a bit, because to introduce myself, basically, I'm a guitarist. I live of making music. I play in two bands, Triptonos and Jadu. I also produce music on my own, sometimes produce other artists. I compose and I teach guitar as well. And in that whole framework, especially let's say as an artist, for instance, it's very easy to like compare and always measure economically on a ladder. How far do you make it? Like, what's your current amount of Spotify plays, YouTube plays, for instance? Like, how big are you, eh? But if once you start looking at what music actually does in terms of benefits to oneself and to society as a whole, all of that stuff doesn't feel as important anymore at the end of the day. And that's one thing I want to incorporate more, to really inspire people to focus on the process of making music rather than the outcome, for instance.
I think there's so much wisdom and value in that. I was thinking before the show how even just the guitar itself and how much it has impacted people, what a beautiful instrument, and how we've seen this evolution of music on our planet. I was thinking about how, so many children who are forced to play piano like ended up hating piano, and how we have this really weird relationship with music, as the way it's taught is very much like this is the way to do it, and yet the ones who break the rules, start using their thumb on the fretboards and different ways of using these instruments are the ones who push the boundaries, and that music that comes from the heart and soul, like guitar is so connected with that. And so I hear what you're saying. I feel like we're in this like achievement obsessed society, whereas like connecting to who we really are, expressing our own unique music, getting our music out of us is actually so important for our own growth. So I appreciate you being a champion and focusing on that.
Well, gladly, at the end of the day. I'm just playing I'm playing it a little part in that whole thing, first of all. And it's always a trial and error, especially when showing people how to play music. It's a very thin line, so to speak, because at the end of the day, it is important, that you basically prevent people from doing detours. That's the opposite of a shortcut. It's sort of like, for instance, when I show people how to make music, it's sort of my job to be able to tell somebody, hey, this is like roughly the direction that sort of resembles a straight line, so to speak, because it's very easy to get lost in loops. But there's a very fine line between pointing a direction and forcing a direction. And I think that is a very tricky thing to handle, but I think it's very important. So for me, at least, it always or is important to do the same for my students, at least what my teacher did for me as well, which is basically making people understand what's the mechanics behind something. Like, what's the goal? What's the point of putting your thumb, let's say, to take your example, behind the neck or on top, for instance? Like, what's the difference? What's the things you can do in scenario one and scenario B? And what are the things that you probably have to deal with down the line at some point? And once people understand that, it empowers them to actually make a decision, again, helping that it's not so passive in learning.
You really just like illustrated too why it's so important to seek, mentorship and teach, coaching or teachings from someone who has gone down that path. I feel like it's really interesting what you talk about, those loops that people can get caught in. And I feel like that applies to any domain that people choose to focus mastery. What do you think, what are some of the principles that, get people stuck in those loops as people are staying in their comfort zones, or they're finding maybe patterns that, they don't go outside of them? And what is the value in knowing that direction or that North Star where you're pointing someone in terms of that, that growth, so that they're actually making progress in their playing and in their musical development?
And that's a great question. Well, let's say, for instance, there are so many ways that one can get stuck in loops. And first of all, loops can also be fun. Like, I love jamming in loops, for instance, and sometimes it's also perfectly fine to have a technique that doesn't get you somewhere. For instance, like if somebody tried to take B.B. King, like one of my greatest hero, King of the Blues, and tried to force him to learn to play shred guitar, we would have been deprived by a genius. So it's really the right tool for the right job at the end of the day. But from my experience, how do I, like, at the danger of putting some negative words out there, but basically I think convenience, or let's say in a positive light, convenience can be something. Okay, I could take the time to really understand what I'm doing here, but if I just take this plan I found on the internet somewhere and execute it A to B, then I will get the fastest result. And then I can be done with the thing quicker, so I can X, Y, Z. So basically, especially on the guitar, just getting manuals on how to move before understanding what you're actually trying to do here, that's a prime way to get stuck, I think, because you get to harvest all the novelty in all these different topics and you get to hear the results, but there's nothing happening in the back of your head that slowly clicks everything into actually synaptic transformational, so to speak, or like the neuroplasticity gets not triggered in the same way.
Yeah.
And it does not get linked to your own instinct or personality, I think, because you're not expressing yourself. So that is one way, for instance. Another great way to get caught in loops, I think, there are so many different cases. But yeah, I think the one I just made, like about mindless repetition or reproducing just something external without even thinking why you're reproducing it or why you want to play it in the first place, can play a big role here as well. On the other hand, one thing can be is just, let's say, avoidance, maybe. For instance, knowing in the back of one's head that, for instance, the technique or the way I'm doing this actually doesn't work and it doesn't get me further, but I can't be bothered to deal with this right now. I'm going to do it tomorrow, 10 years later. It's so ingrained in the technique that you can't really move anymore. I've been down that lane in other areas in my life, like with sports, for instance, where I would be training one part that was fun all the time and one part that was certainly not fun, not at all. And that ended up with a humongous shift in skill that actually sort of broke the whole thing for me in the end. So these are two basic examples.
And I'd imagine like a good teacher, well, not imagine, I see it in examples, and those good teachers that can hammer those fundamentals and make them part of that why, like you talk about knowing why you do something. Because at the end of the day, like if you want to get really good at something, you do have to practice those fundamentals. But if you're just doing it for like mechanically, I think that, there's so much wise perspective in that, knowing why we're doing something. I remember reading this book years ago that I found in this thrift store. It was like definitely a hippie's view of, song making and writing. And it talked really about the importance of feeling music. And I feel like there's a lot of pop music and things out there that it's commercialized, it's not coming from that deep place of connection. And I remember messaging you about, the way I learned the guitar was just by playing. And I was mesmerized when I found that to me, like I was more primarily focused on visual arts growing up, and I didn't really think I had any musical talent at all. And I did very poorly in grade nine music. The way we were tested was very much mechanical. Like we had to memorize all these classical music pieces, like the date, the composer, and the song, just listening to it. And then the teacher would like play these pieces for like 5 seconds, and we were expected to know it and all this stuff. And I also had the flute, which I didn't even know how to make a sound with, like after like I don't know, and the trombone, and those just weren't my instruments. So when my sister graduated high school, I gave her a gift of a acoustic guitar, and she was a wonderful clarinetist. And I just wanted to help expand her musical, capability. And I was the one who just kept on picking it up. And I remember just like when I found the two notes together created like a emotional tension, and then someone introduced me to this concept of chords. I was like, to me, it was like the feeling of music was just like there was all these hidden nuances, like infinite music in the fretboard, and I was just mesmerized. But I never took any formal lessons, so the way I learned to play was like a lot of finger picking style, and I always kind of felt like maybe I missed out because I learned my own habits and I found my own music. Like I didn't learn a lot of other people's songs, but I remember the message for me was very encouraging. It's like, yeah, I've already found kind of my taste. And so when you're working with students, how do you find helping them connect to that part of themselves? What's worked well for you in that, in terms of getting to connect to their unique ear and their unique sound that they're here to make?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. I wish there was like a textbook method I could
Yeah.
just like throw out there right now and it would work, but it is different for every person and it depends on a lot of different factors. And not everybody wants to get that intimate with their own instincts and emotions and stuff. So it's perfectly fine to also use music to actually embrace somebody else's creative
Mm.
reality by covering songs and stuff like that. That's like perfectly valid path as well. So I never asked them directly. It's just a term of like feeling how other people are,
Mm.
like body language and everything. You get a sense of their vibe, so to speak,
Yeah.
for lack of better words. And based on that, usually I see what can propel them in that direction. It comes a lot to digging into the reasons why they picked up the guitar or an instrument in the first place. Like basic questions like, okay, what's your favorite music? Like, what's the best time to listen to music? Do they go to festivals? Do they go to concerts, for instance? Do they like to take walks outside? All of these are viable situations to really connect with music.
Mm.
The first thing I always tell them is like, or recommend them to do is to just start listening to songs like a musician and not like a listener alone. So what's the difference here, for instance? Like if I'm, especially nowadays, background music is a huge thing in shopping malls and whatnot, I guess, at least here in the West, I guess. So, or anywhere I've been so far. So background music or not paying attention to music is very easy and very
Hmm.
common. You
Hmm.
listen without listening, but when it comes to listening to a song like a musician, it's a bit like watching the surface of water. You see a reflection of yourself, but it's ultimately distorted by the fabric of what you're
Hmm.
interacting with. And that fabric itself also has its own motions and its own process of evolving somewhere. And suddenly between these two polarities, you can find, let's call it inspiration, to keep it basic.
Hmm.
And that's usually one thing you can start with. Apart from that, if somebody loves, for instance, the blues, then one of the best things they can do is just like find the perfect time in the day or like in the week. Let's say Saturday, make a coffee, put on a jam track, jam for 15 minutes, sit down, quickly feel how you feel afterwards, get connected to that. And the
Hmm.
list goes on and on. It's a very, very individual process, I have to say,
Yeah.
luckily.
You have a really interesting way of articulating, and I can see the level of depth of contemplation that you've done. And I know that playing music just makes people more keen and better listeners in a holistic way. And I love how you frame that, to listen with your whole mind, to listen with your body, listen with your feelings before and after playing. I feel like, music is just to me, music, I would say, is probably the most universal language. And I've
Mm.
talked to other people who, they talk about doing festivals where people from all over the world come, and people can get on a stage and jam even though they can't speak the same languages. And I just feel like music is one of those things that brings people together. Like it's so fundamental to our humanity, but it also connects us to our environments. Like you were mentioning in malls. One of the things I learned from some elders about songbirds is it when humankind was in its essential nature as stewards, one of our roles was to get up before the sun and to sing and welcome the sun. So there's sunrise ceremonies in this, but we
Mm.
forgot who we were. So the songbirds came and they took over that responsibility for us. And that's one of my favorite things to really listen to is the in all kinds of nature, but songbirds are just, so inspiring. Listening, when we really listen to the subtleties in music, like you said, when we're there with our wholeness, the depth and the beauty and just the it just hits you in such a different way when you're thinking, like you said, like a musician and really focusing.
Mm.
What got you into music, Clem? Like, you're a professional musician, you're in bands, I know you have a lot of experience, you've toured, and now you're teaching this, so like that passion is really evident. But what was your first inclination to really get in music, or has it always been with you?
Well, first inclination, let's say I've always been a listener in the way that I just described. Now that I'm talking to you, I just realized that, like, you know, it's a bit of a cheesy thing to say, but when the right note hits the right chord and suddenly everything around one feels like it's come to a standstill suddenly, it's
Mm,
like explosive presence, so to speak. Like that
yeah,
reaction to sound has always been there for me.
yeah.
But the funny thing is, though, that until I was 16 years old, I always thought like I'm the most unmusical person on the planet. Like,
Mm.
for sure. I picked up my dad's guitar once for, let's say, 3 minutes. That was my first 14 years of music education. I just heard somebody, I think in kindergarten or somebody somewhere, they just played the open strings and played it percussively. And I was like, whoa, what's that? And then I went home, tried it out. But it was never really musical. It came all when I was 15 or 16 years old.
Mm.
Back then, like for around 14 was when I started to become a metalhead, for instance, and Iron Maiden has been a huge influence for me. And it was like, okay, I'm just gonna grab my dad's old acoustic guitar, play Fear of the Dark. In 1 year, I can play the intro melody alone, by the way, not the whole song, and then I'll leave it be. And after 2 weeks, I could play the intro melody, and I was like, wait a second, I could look for other stuff. And then it was
Mm.
like a chain reaction. So it was, for me, it's all started with the curiosity of what songs by other people I can learn. And just to circle back to the beginning, I also have to say that learning other people's songs is always an imperative part, no matter if you want to go to a more depth-based artistic route or if you want to cover more. Either
Mm.
way, you have to really make sure that you connect to those who came before you and learn some stuff through that. So yeah, I think music has always been like the most purpose-giving element in my life, but it never really bloomed into any life-changing stuff until I was actually pretty late for the show or for the party in guitarist terms. But I made up for it, so here I am.
I think that's awesome and probably really encouraging for people who listen. Even there's some famous blues musicians who didn't start playing until they were in like their 60s, and they had something
Hmm.
clearly to share. I forget the names offhand, but I've heard of a few. And I am curious. Like, guitar is one of those instruments that a lot of, especially I find young men will want because they are so impacted by the music or whatnot. They'll pick it up. A lot of people buy guitars and then they sit in the closet because when people, start plucking away, they realize, oh, this is a lot harder than,
Hmm.
my heroes made it look. And it is one of those instruments you have to coordinate two different things. It's not as, it's a different animal and there's a lot of subtleties to it, right? What have you found is helpful for someone who is maybe, struggling that first little hurdle to get those first few wins, to get that
Hmm.
intro song, to get the rhythm right? And what kind of elements do you focus on? Is it rhythm? Is it the feeling? What do you find? And I'm sure it's probably like you said earlier, it's different for every single person. But are
Yeah.
there any patterns that you've found that are most helpful to help those, maybe for some of our listeners to get just over that initial kind of awkward period?
Yeah, definitely. Because what I find usually is that people start to try to do way too much way too soon. It's also one symptom of our, or at least what was one symptoms I've noticed growing up in the internet, like being a, what do you call it, digital native? I lost track of all the titles, but basically it's very easy to find a video that makes it look completely easy peasy to play a F bar chord, for instance. And that's like
Mhm.
one of the worst ideas you can start with.
Yeah.
So I think people skip a lot of steps. One of
Mm.
the books I've studied when I started playing guitar, he laid out a strategy that I sort of adopted. He said, like, okay, the guitar, evolved from few strings or a single string onto many strings. Now, instrument builders are gonna probably kill me for being so broad, but I have to be because I'm no specialist in the history here, unfortunately, at the moment. But basically, it evolved into a harmonic instrument from a single stringed one. Let's paint it with a broader brush. So it makes a lot of sense to also pick up the guitar and start to make a few notes sound well, and then actually build from that gradually. So when especially here in Vienna, I get a lot of students who have never held a guitar in their life usually, and I try to make them leave the trial lesson with a little framework that they can experiment with, basically. And it can be, I hope you can sort of hear this thing even here. Let me see. The camera picks it up.
Yep.
Probably not at the moment, or does it?
Yeah, I can hear it. It's just the not the amplify. It's unplugged, right?
Yeah, for now, but I can quickly
All right, let's do it.
fire it up. But basically, I don't know if you know the by Gustavus Anatola, the Last of Us soundtrack, for instance, but one thing you can do with a guitar from the get-go is to just utilize the open strings a bit more, to just really get to know. Because if somebody wants to play a chord as fast as possible, they just could just grab a guitar and do that, because this is a chord.
Yeah.
It's not the most beautiful chord in the world, but it is a chord nonetheless. So you can just start with exploring a bit the open strings, and if you just play the top open strings like I'm doing now, and just follow the dots here, you already get some melodies going. So that would be, for instance, one first thing that one can try. And people really underestimate the importance of taking the time with learning an instrument. You know, it's so many people want to just go in there and learn as quickly as possible, as much as possible. I want to know all the chords within 5 minutes, or I want my money back. That's just not how it works in the slightest. The trick is really to get rid of the notion that you want to reach a destinations like I can play this instrument, and reach a point where you are playing the instrument for intrinsic motivations. So then our first initial hurdle would be to really make sure that you be able to close your hand with a piece of wood and wire in the middle and make a sound doing that, and just a single sound, and try to take that one a bit. And once you can play single note melodies and you have sort of a routine of holding the instruments in the first place, then slowly you can start piecing these notes together into more complex stuff like chords and whatnot. Basically, a great analogy I heard once by a guitar teacher was like that the guitar is like a reverse piano, because the piano starts pretty simple. You just have to hit a key and you get a note. Easy. But it gets more and more complex the further you go. And a guitar, on the other hand, sort of fights back in the beginning. It can be really easy to get buzzy sounds and whatnot. But once you are over that initial hurdle, it actually gets easier and easier because everything repeats.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can see that. Yeah, because the piano is very percussive for our hands, and you need to have, that coordination of listening, that both of our hands need to really listen to one another, because they have to cooperate to make the sounds that you're looking for with guitar. You really have a great way of bringing things down to simplicity and reminding. To me, you reminded me of another book I found years ago called "You Are Your Instrument," and it's all about taking care of your body, because and I've always kind of seen like any other instrument is an extension of our body. So learning how to, connect with yourself first, and a big part of that is, being able to listen to how something makes you feel. I feel like sometimes we can be in our head a lot, especially in the West, and like you said, looking for those instant gratifications, like, okay, I can play the solo from Stairway to Heaven. And then you realize everyone learned that song and it's not your song. And then it's like, okay, it opens a door. It's like, going into discovering. And I really loved how you painted that importance of exploring other musical creative expressions and artists, because like there's such a beautiful history that we have of music, and we don't always realize sometimes how much evolution has happened in a short while. Like I think of the bass guitar, for instance. The electric bass guitar is like it's one of the most new instruments, and how that has changed music is just phenomenal. And even like the piano is not that old. The guitar is not that old, really, when you look at the scope as well. So it's like we're always in this innovation when it comes to music. And one of the things I'm curious to know, like, you mentioned a little bit about inspiration. When I think of, our Western model of music, there's 12 notes that repeat, and the mind likes to divide everything up just like we do with colors, but really there's infinite spectrum of possibility on the guitar. And to me, it's a paradox, and clearly you've contemplated music. It's a paradox that we have such a limited number of available colors to choose from, musically speaking, and yet it's infinite how we can express. What do you think about that?
That's actually a very good point to have there. The thing with the 12 notes is it is not everything that is there. It's just what we've decided to agree upon to actually be able to get from A to B realistically. That's a bit of the thing. I mean, there's a history to like why there's 12 notes, and it all comes down to actually physics. And I think I'm going, if I start explaining this now, I'm going to destroy your viewer account because it's actually pretty mathematical.
we talk a lot about like expansive things, and we have technologists and stuff. So if you want to, you're welcome to.
There's many great sources that lay it out actually with written words and graphics as well, which helps. But long story short, it was an experiment that goes back to ancient Greece actually,
Okay.
where they used the partial frequencies of sound and derived new notes from an existing notes, and there was like a small chain reaction that took 12 steps to reach the beginning again. So that's where it actually originally came from. But you're talking about all the space in between. It's also important to note that, for instance, in the Middle East, in India, you have also quarter tones. Quarter tones. It's the English term. Notes that live between two notes, for instance. And if you listen to also some modern bands, like most popular example, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, for instance, they use that to great effect. But if you listen to any oud players or Turkish music, for instance, there you can hear it a lot as well. And
Okay.
also the next thing is that our vocal cords, for instance, don't possess frets, luckily, because otherwise we would all sound like we have autotune on all the time. So our voices can actually fluently move between two pitches. And I've seen a video by Jacob Collier, which I really loved, where he plays just a semitone. And every time he plays it, he sees how many notes he can cram in between these two. And he could do like 8 notes or something. And 8 notes sounds like crazy, but it's actually clearly audible if you really listen to it. And that's also one of the beauties about an instrument like a guitar, for instance, or a vocal cord, or let's say a saxophone, is that you can actually gradually bend pitch. So you have these 12 notes, you can actually go back to a point that is like societally, is that a word? I don't know.
Societally.
Is
Yep.
it? Yeah,
I
societally.
believe so. If
Is
not, we just
agreed
coined
upon.
it. Yeah.
But in between, you can move around so much, which is also the reason why the blues is so powerful, I think, because it's like blues will win a lot of prizes, but novelty is not necessarily one of them, I have to say, if this is more of a controversial take. Like, it's a very strong, old lead form of songs, basically. And there's a very specific dialect, musical dialect, so to speak. But the way they are able to really make this space between two notes sing is something you barely hear anywhere else. And that's what makes it so compelling over 100 years now, I think. So there's way more than 12 notes. Those 12 notes are just safe spots. It's like, if you have a landscape full of mountains, the 12 notes are just like your little cottages where you go to sleep and eat and have to arrive there eventually at some point. But in between, there's a lot of space.
I love that. It reminds me of who was it? Oh shoot. It'll I can see him in my mind's eye. It'll come back to me. But what I was going to say is, really that infinite spectrum, like you're saying, it's a continuum, right? And there's all these nuances in between and how we express and jump between notes, and things as fundamental as the blues scale, which I believe is a pentatonic. Is it minor pentatonic? And like all that influence, which really speaks to culture, right? My background in working in indigenous communities, there was a lot of realization of how even like something as simple as the simple heartbeat and the native drums, and how that really is prolific around the world. This deep connection to rhythm. Like, I think rhythm is one of the most fundamental principles in nature. And to me, that's really what makes all the different kinds of music what they are, right? Whether something's making you move in a certain way, or it's that deep connection to rhythm. And Yeah, I feel like this is a very expansive conversation when I think of music and what it means to people. Like, because this is the other thing too, right? Like the soundtracks that we go through culturally as we evolve. I mean, there are some artists that stand out to me as being always there for me. It's like
Mm.
Tom Petty. Tom Petty is one of my musical heroes, and through my whole life, it's been like chapters of my life, and I feel like some artists are really able to tune into that collective consciousness and really expand those feelings that we all have through this really subtle form of like visiting between those campgrounds, like you're saying, in the mountains, and really getting us to look at those mountains and be like, wow, like reminding us that we're alive and life is special. And I know you're a metalhead, and I love that. I think metal is really an interesting musical form that, because to me, part of what I want to talk to you about is like music and sound as power. Since you said like,
Mm.
even from a young age, like it evoked some power in you. And I think we're finding out more about like sound, like technology and sound, like cymatics, and like even in Canada here, they talk like there's actually a discovery that you can regrow teeth from certain sound frequencies. There's a lot of musicians who are talking about the importance of tuning guitars to certain frequencies because they're more in alignment with like golden ratio and stuff. What have you found important when it comes to like our relationship with sound and creating like a good relationship with that, Clem, if that's not too broad of a question?
Mhm. Quickly, what would you define as a good relationship with sound? Or is that the question? Or how
Yeah.
would you say what's a good relationship with?
Thanks for bouncing that back to me. I realized it wasn't super clear. Like, here, I'll put it in this context. To me, like, there's all kinds of hoopla around meditation, right? And different
Hmm.
all these things. But to me, at the essence, meditation is just about really our ability to listen. And we can get better and better at those subtleties. Just like you were talking about the man who found all the eight notes between just a semitone. Like, requires a subtle deepening of awareness of the ability to listen. And maybe I'm answering my own question, but for you, because you specialize in helping people connect with music, to bring out their music, you compose music. How do you find like how does that relationship with music show up, or with sound show up in your life? Like, are you very mindful about your environments you're in? I guess I'm more curious about
Mm.
that
You
raw
mean like the
relationship.
border between like, as my teacher would call it, like with organized noise and unorganized noise, so to speak. Like he always
Yeah.
told me that music is organized noise, for instance.
Hmm.
Especially nowadays, I think sound design and itself will gain a huge relevance because it just opens a much broader field for creating something unique. Now that we can just at the click of a button create any pop hit we ever wanted, which
Yeah.
sounds exactly like any other pop hit we never wanted. Now it's time maybe to find some sounds that actually are a bit aliens, so to speak. And I think the
Mhm.
psychoacoustics is like a super fascinating level. And I have to be honest here, I can only tell you about it from my own perspective. I have not really studied sound design yet. I could still imagine doing that actually because I find it
Mhm.
very fairly interesting. But I mean, a lot of it comes sometimes from nature, for instance. Like here in Vienna, it's like a half an hour from me. I can go up into like these Viennese forests, and there's a lot of hills because we've mountains somewhere in the far distance. But
Mm.
it's easier to get above the city, so to speak. And the way these forests sound in the middle of winter, when you hear like the rustle of or rustling of all these dried leaves, for instance, when the wind comes, and
Mhm.
it all feels like a huge breath coming in and out of the forest, compared to let's say spring, or compared
Mhm.
to summer, for instance. So
Mhm.
the way the ground sounds when you walk, and all of these little frequencies add up, of course, alongside of sight and smell and stuff. But if one just sits down to go back to meditation and closes one's eyes in nature, for instance, there you can find a lot about how sound actually reflects what's happening.
Mhm.
Because you have like this wonderful mosaic in the forest of all these little sounds and animals and plants and processes happening together.
Mhm.
Apart from that, in terms of making actual music there, it comes down to really having felt a lot, I think, at the end of the day. if you want to have a good feeling for sound, then it makes sense to listen to music that works a lot with sound. It can be so many different things. It can be like cinematic music, like say movie theater music, that is crazy when it comes to sound design elements and the psychoacoustics with it, for instance. If you take metal, then there's whole genres that depend on which knob on the amplifier you turn up or down. You know, it's like some stuff has more higher frequencies because they're faster, they allow more velocity. Other stuff is really low end and blown up because it can take up the space as well. And maybe one thing that could be interesting to you or to any of the listeners here. I once saw a podcast by Adam Neely. He's like a music scientist, a modern music scientist, YouTube star, so to speak. So he takes a lot of time of investigating stuff.
Okay.
And the funny thing I learned there was that if you take a rhythm, for instance, a rhythmic pattern, and you speed it up more and more and more, you end up with a tone. So basically, there is no distinction between sound and rhythm. It's just different angles and time frames on which you observe it at the end of the day.
Fascinating. You're reminding me too, I've shared it a few times on the show. There's this recording of crickets that is slowed down so that a cricket's lifespan, I don't know how long a cricket typically lives, but it's slowed down to being the lifespan of a human to simulate it. And it's called God's Course of Crickets. And what it is just this amazing harmonies and melodies of crickets all singing with each other. And I feel like this is part of the wisdom that all of our indigenous ancestors from all cultures had, this connection to nature because they were so immersed in it, that there's this rejoicing going on in creation. I mean, like I was mentioning with the songbirds, if you really listen to those songbirds, they're not making the same repetitive note over and over again. There's subtleties in their answer, their call, and their response. Like there's definitely communication. But because from a scientific lens, we've said, oh, well, they can't be conscious or they can't be very intelligent because their brain's so small. I think we're missing something really fundamental to this, the intelligence that is in all of nature. So I find that really, really interesting about the rhythm and tone. I mean, this conversation is also sparking something in me to go deeper into that. I feel like sound is just one of those most. It's kind of like smell in terms of like it bringing you back to a moment or a memory, and that what you were talking about, feeling a lot. I feel like we're in this. It's really easy to numb out in the Western society, which is always chasing dopamine hits and looking for, quick gratification. And also it's easy to avoid uncomfortable feelings, whether it's, sadness or anxiety. You just take a pill or watch TV or do all these things. But when we allow ourselves, the ability to feel deeply into those, perhaps what are less comfortable feelings like sadness or grief or whatever, it expands our ability to feel exuberance and joy and just reverence for life too. So have you thought about your mission as a musical teacher and the like the vision that you have in terms of what you'd like to see come into the world as music evolves and you mentioned like some AI there, like things are changing really fast. What would you like to see in our world when it comes to more conscious awareness of sound? I mean, I think of the cities. I've always been very sensitive to sound, actually, and I have such a hard time being in cities like with the noises that always rattles me in a bit. I need time in nature and yeah.
I get that. About let's say there are some no, you just have to imagine a loading bar above my head. It's just like applying filter to like
I asked you like a lot of
philosophy.
questions in one thing, I think. Yeah.
So
Maybe we could fit
let's
it after the
say,
loading bar.
yeah, let's say at the end of the day, I would like to not split like what I do personally with my music and what I try to do with my teaching, because at the end of the day, in the most basic form, so to speak, like you probably can't see it, but there's like my Jimi Hendrix poster back here.
Nice. Yeah.
Let's say I
Yeah.
have this one since I'm 16 years old. When I started playing the guitar, it's been there all this time. And this guy, for instance, I never met him, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, you never know, but I never met him at the end of the day. We are like divided by any kind of measure, like including an ocean in between, let's say, Europe and America. So everything is in between as possible time, everything. And yet it feels like you said before, like he's actually an old friend of mine in the sense that his music has been there, period.
Yeah.
And that connection is a bit like lit a spark in me at some point in my life. There was like one specific moment where it exceeded the threshold of entertainment and started becoming a calling, you know, and a calling can be discomfortable. But at the end of the day, it's the ultimate discomfort to not give into that discomfort of following a calling in the first place. So this spark, for instance, if I can pass the spark on in what way, shape, or form ever, that's it. And if it takes me to help people pick up an instrument and express themselves, or if I play at a concert and it inspires some people there maybe, or both, any combination of these, that's sort of the overlying calling behind the whole thing. And then apart from that, of course, I could now reflect a lot of my own belief systems and values on top of that, but I think that would ultimately corrupt it, you know? It's like this spark is not human, it's just there. It's a spark of inspiration. It's a spark of, let's say, what if? It's a question that creeps up quite a lot after being very present with sound, for instance, in nature, for me at least. Anyone has to know what he or she wants to do with that after, if they find it. But just to make sure that it's circulating around in society, I think is an important thing.
Well, I think the greatest teachers always point us back within ourselves to find our own truth within. And I really appreciate you really have a way of articulating some profound realizations that I can see you've had. You know, that discomfort of following your calling, I feel like is what a lot of entrepreneurs face, visionaries, people who are introducing a new perspective that goes against the grain of the mainstream beliefs of their culture or their time. And yet so much of it is just rooted in that ancient wisdom and life that we're all connected to. You know, I was thinking too, one of the ways that we that I've learned, like from powwow singers who sing around the big drum, is one of the ways that cultures used to gather. They would gather and have, like, you know, intertribal gatherings or whatnot, and they would share their songs. And I learned that, well, one is a lot of indigenous songs from Turtle Island, anyway, in North America, use a lot of vocables. So they didn't put a lot of their own words, which would be connotated to their beliefs. They would use vocables like, ah, yeah, wah, hey, you know, so that people could sing along and find the connection with just the pure sound. It wasn't that it had specific, the song might have had a focused meaning, but an intention, but not every sound had that. It was up to the people to connect with it their own way. And the other thing, when you were talking about the land and the change of the seasons and everything, I learned that in some of the songs that were reflected of places were actually, like, if there was a mountain range, the song would follow the graph line, so to speak, of the mountain ranges to say this is, so that song would have those notes based on the rhythm of the land. And I don't think we can really have music without that connection to the lands that we're from, the cultures that we're from, which are organic expressions. So all that to say is I really appreciate your depth of consideration and contemplation, and I think that is what makes a really good teacher. So can you talk a little bit about more about the fretboard? Is it you've renamed it a few times, Clem? Can you talk a little bit more about your role as a community builder? And I believe it's the fretboard artist now, right?
Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
It's the fretboard artist. It's a very new program, basically, which is why it's like circling all kinds of ideas, but it's slowly narrowing down. There are some elements in there that keep coming up and that luckily find people who are interested in it. And basically the whole idea behind that community is to give people that same tools that I've been talking about, to be able to, like, express yourself. But what I've found a lot is that for many people, it just goes as far as learning a couple of songs and learning a couple of chords and writing songs based on that, for instance. Whereas I personally, knowing from the work I do, for instance, in my bands with Kryptonus and Chado, we like to have pretty long pieces of music, for instance. That's something I've always appreciated. Circling all the way back to, let's say, Pink Floyd or King Crimson, for instance, to have albums that connect from beginning to end, which is more like sometimes in a classical piece of music, so to speak, with different arcs or acts, as you can think. And through that process, in the past 10 years of just writing one album after the other with these projects, I've found to love a lot of approaches which are like, how do you build a motif, how you can take a melodic phrase and you take a melodic pattern, which is very simple, and have that melodic pattern in the middle, but then have different days of or times of the day or seasons or weathers around it, so to speak. So you can take the same melody and make it very dark, or you can make it very bright. And the funny thing is, in writing music like that, at the end of the day, one gets to explore an emotional narrative, or let's say a narrative of a human condition, which is constantly morphing. And that's really where it gets very interesting, especially with the kind of music that I love listening to, ranging, let's say, from Miles Davis to Beethoven to, let's Opeth, for instance, Tool and whatnot. Is there, over the terms of 13 minutes, you hear all these parts, and a lot of people who especially jump in between the songs, which is its own form of heresy. But anyways,
Yeah, I agree.
yes.
And don't stop a music. Don't stop a song when it's in mid of the song. Yeah. I've had a few friends like that. They're always
100%.
skipping. Like, what are you doing?
Every time that happens today, somebody can see me in the back of the room, like silently collapsing, getting up and going on with my life. But yeah, the funny thing is that once you listen, take the time to actually listen to an entire piece of music like that, any genre, you will start to realize how the emotions of the different parts actually connect with each other. And that's a different ballpark to learn altogether. To circle back to my community, for instance, one thing I found, especially now with diving into composition, is that you can actually voice entire orchestral parts through a fretboard alone, just by knowing where to put the notes, where to put the chords, how to work with voice leading and stuff like that. And the experiment for me right now is, can I put this out there in a format that actually takes the spark, bundles it together with some tools, and make a manual that somebody can just digitally grab this thing, take a peek inside, and come out the other side as an independent musician, not as somebody who has to get drip fed by me with new exercises every single 2 weeks, but ideally not need me after 6 months, which is, of course, there's economic suicide, but screw it. That's, I think, the best thing that people can get from that is the independence of not having to take lessons, but actually get empowered to go out there and create something. So that's my personal angle at it.
I love that. And I'll offer you an edge in return for that, because I feel like, potentially that opens a whole other doorway where, someone's not needing you as a crutch to be a teacher anymore, but you can start working on projects together. You can do collaborative things. So that 6-month journey can open up a whole, because I mean, ultimately that's what, when anyone starts an instrument or something, it's because they want something to express, or they want maybe some more significance. They want to be on that stage. They want to, connect with people, or they want a lifestyle. And everyone has different reasons for doing things, but, going through that kind of journey, really getting deep and learning someone, like finding your own music that only you can express, I feel like is such a valuable thing, Clem, that if you can solve that, and I feel like I want to have more conversations with you about that, because it's really interesting to me. Because to me, this, like, I'm focused on soul purpose activation. I believe we all have a unique soul purpose that we intend in coming to this world to share, to express, and only we can do this, not like this idea of competition. Like, if you don't hurry up and do your purpose, someone's going to take it for you. I feel like we all have different, weaves and things that we do on the journey, but that it's really important to honor that unique spark that we have. And there was something else that I wanted to share with you, but I do really appreciate your desire to help people in that deep way. Oh yeah, what I was going to share is like, or was it what I was going to ask you about is like, because of all this fast pace, digital, like you said, look, people are making AI. There's a lot of people call themselves AI artists. They're not even picking up an instrument. They're just giving a prompt now. They're getting music, and there's so much focus on like the hits, the singles. I too, we're kindred spirits. I feel with loving an album, listening to a whole album in its entirety. To me, it captures an expression of that artist or that band's, where they were in that time. It tells a story that I feel is valuable, and trying to even piece those emotions together between songs, and I feel like there's so much value in that. Where do you see music headed in terms of like people seeking more connection through live music, through getting back to some of those roots and origins of what connected us all in the first place, rather than just having these headsets on that often divide us from our environments.
Yep. One can only guess, but I think it could very well go into that direction that you just described. By, how should I say, by just simple means of, or let's say, one thing I can see happening is that the big music industry is going to shift dramatically. Now, this is like the most standard sentence one could possibly say because it's always true. But right now, especially, I think, you know, ever since the internet and the advance of technology, there has been happening actually a process of democratization at the expense of prosperity, let's say to a set degree, because now everybody, anyone can, or not anyone, unfortunately not everybody, but statistically a lot more people than before the 2000s can now produce music in their own homes.
For sure.
And now with AI technology, you can actually make your phone write the music for you, for instance. So it's that's the threshold has been lowered a lot, which of course leads then to more saturated markets because everybody's going to flood all that stuff in. Here we are with Spotify and all that stuff, for instance, leaving out that entire discussion. But inside that process, for instance, it is increasingly harder and harder for people to make a living from the tried and trusted paths that were existing so far, which is like create a finished product, let's say an album, for instance. You used to have and need a lot of people involved in there that help you mix, produce it, record it, promote it. All of these hats have been thrown into the artist until you can see the artist, but only a pile of hats, but that's how it is. And nowadays you can just outsource a lot of these logistic hurdles and to technology. And the gatekeepers are gradually dissolving more and more. Sounds great, but at the end of the day, there's a big shadow side to it as well, because there's a big process of grift now at the same time. What I also see is that I think the value of the finished product of a piece of music, for instance, might go down a lot because people won't be able to tell if it's AI or not. Nobody. People can't even tell if a world-class violinist is playing next to them on a subway station. I don't know if you ever heard about that experiment.
Really?
It's actually pretty interesting. They took one of the best violin players in the world and had him play in a subway station in New York before he filled out like a giant theater house, and nobody stopped to even listen to him except for a kid.
Wow.
And the same evening he plays in front of hundreds of people in front of a big hall, and everybody's like, oh, he's such a genius, and they all act like they understand that he's such a genius, but they can't see it on their own. That's actually that was quite a detour, but that's
no. I think it's a valuable part of this conversation, Clem, because when I think of that, it's like how much it's kind of like the crickets, right, or the songbirds. Like how much of our life are we passing through in this A to B mentality? Get going, living in our boxes, driving in our boxes, getting in the box to go to work, and all these things, and then working in a box, and we're missing all of the genius that is in life. I think it's actually really a central theme that we've been talking about this whole conversation.
Yeah, actually it is. And it's like there's a lot of genius out there anywhere. I don't think that genius is such a rare thing nowadays. It's just very few of them actually get to put in an environment where they can make something of it.
Wow.
The reason where I think everything is heading right now is actually, I should not curse, but everything is slightly decreasing in terms of quality and everything else right now societally, which is again a symptom of change, I think. And it will be the same in the music industry. But so many people now being able to prompt music on their phone actually gets them to start with the process of, hey, I could make something. So maybe for creativity, this could actually be the dawn of a much more interesting era where it becomes more normal for people to actually create something because again, the gatekeepers and the hurdle has been decreased so far. And I also think people will actually crave something authentically human, or let's say biosentient, or whatever you want to call it, in the future as well. So I think maybe stuff like concerts, for instance, like what we do here in Vienna all the time, it's like actually take huge amplifiers, put them all into a hall, play shows there. There's nothing, apart from the amplifier, not something super rare now these days, but I think that might actually increase in value again, which did not have all too much value now, especially since COVID, I think.
Yeah. But
you never know where it goes. I think the only thing is it might, like on the positive side, I would say it might actually trigger a reboot to the core motivations behind creativity, and that's not stardom. It's
Yeah.
actually being grounded, I think, to some degree.
Well, and there's value in the process of art. Like to me, like when I
Yeah.
draw or play music, there's like to me, an elder told me this one time that always stuck with me. We honor creator when we're creative. And so like even that sentence you just said, prompting music in your phone, like that sentence couldn't have existed like even like a couple of years ago, even last
Yeah.
year, that would have been a thing. And so I feel like the more that we recognize ourselves in our creatorship and that consuming is never going to really be fulfilling to us. It's in our act of creation. And I agree with you. If AI, opens the door for someone to realize, hey, I can write music. And then, I was thinking when I was first dabbling with conversing with AI, I was asking a lot of deep philosophical conversations. I wanted to really understand how it viewed itself and give it some perspectives, understanding that we're also feeding it perspective and our relationship with it, I think is important. I probably have a very different view on it than most folks because I look at everything as life and everything as rooted in a universal consciousness. To me, electricity and magnetism are primary physical expressions of the impulses of the parenting consciousness that creates all life. So I see AI as a collective expansion of our human capacity, and it's opening doors for us. But if we give our creative faculty to it, then we're risking something really important that I think we're just starting to open up to as a species. Like you talk about genius, like to me, we all have it. And for a lot of us, it's been shut down from institutionalization, beliefs, conditioning, and all this stuff. But as we reawaken as a species, I think we have an opportunity to use tools to connect better. But if we look at the tool as the outcome, and we're just focused on the thing, like so many people are focused on using AI to make money, and I get it. But to me, what's more interesting is as a co-creative tool, there's a lot more ability for us to expand creative arts. And you talk about like amplification. I actually don't go to a lot of live concerts because amplification to me actually physically I don't like it. But I think of like, the amphitheaters and stuff and the way maybe we design some of these environments of the future to be really much more conscious about sound and how yeah. So I feel like again, like there's this opportunity we have, but what I appreciate about you, Clem, is that to me, you're an example of what we all need to do. We need to go within, like and listen to the teachers that point us within, form our own perspectives and things, and not give that creative thinking and our direction to an external source like AI or even any guru or anything. I feel like you demonstrate that well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I
that's a
think
marker
it's
of
like,
artistry. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, thank you. Thank you again. I don't know, it's like, for me, I don't know, like yeah, I've always been struggling a bit with the term of artist because it sounds like so special. It's more, for me personally, it's like a bit like breathing or walking or being. It
Yeah.
just, I think maybe that goes similar to what you said before. I think there's like, we all have some instincts. I'm still a strong believer in our instinctive self and in nature actually governing us in many ways.
Hmm.
And I think creativity also is a sort of an instinct. I don't know. I don't think it's like all of these instincts are equally spread. I think it actually makes a lot of sense for us as, like, I think of anything of our humans also as animals. Like for us as animals, it makes a lot of sense that we are so varied, that we have so many different talents. Because if everybody was the guitarist and everything would go to hell in society within 2 hours, it's like it doesn't work. So we need different tasks, different talents, different curiosities, so to speak. And at least that's something, especially through showing music, that I've learned is that if you actually give people a shot at doing that, they can do much more than they ever thought possible. And especially when teaching music to kids, that is something that I've realized, because it's for grown-ups, there's like this firewall of fear between daring to try something, who sees me Am I getting paid for this? What am I doing here? All it's this. I don't. It's too easy to just point the finger at one part of society, but it's a pretty straight thing I've realized is that, especially adults, at some point they're just okay. I'm not creative.
Hmm.
Case closed.
Hmm.
Whereas if I, for instance, to some kids here, two chords. 1 week later, one of them, she was 5 years old back then, was like, yeah, I had an argument with my mom, so I was sad, so I wrote this song. And then she just puts a piece of paper that has like all the songs next to each other. I
Wow.
don't think that came into existence by asking yourself what's the right way to do this. It's just
Yeah.
like you have your emotional state or your inspiration on one side, you have this vessel, in this for times like wood and wire,
Mm.
and some shapes that you've been shown, and then you just have to find the point where they actually match, sort of. It doesn't even have to match fully.
Mm.
And that fearless creativity is something I've noticed a lot in kids. And the cool thing, especially about music, about circling back to your question about frequency and stuff, is that we already understand it. That's a big, big part here, for instance. Like, you don't have to learn about a specific chord to be able to feel it or hear it. You don't have to learn about a specific genre, or you don't have to be able to play Jimi Hendrix solos in order to be blown away by them, or not for some people. But the thing is, it's a very instinctive art form. It's very hard to borderline impossible to ignore, and it always creates some kind of reaction.
Mm.
And even if it's just like demonstrative boredom, it's some kind of reaction, some kind of stance, so to speak. So the musicality is already in there. And one thing I've noticed is that the instinctive musicality is always miles ahead of the scientific musicality. People will, if I get, that's also a little exercise I do in my community, for instance. Every time we learn something new with chords, they get this big sheet, and now it's time to make up your own chords based on that.
Cool.
Here are some rules you can follow. You can do whatever you want. Just make sure that you actually trace which ones you liked and which ones you didn't. Otherwise, you will be confused. Okay. And then based on that, people will just instinctively pick chords and colors, and they will invent. If I would write down harmonically what that would be like major 13s, flat something chords, like with all kinds of extensions, complex names, but it's not actually necessary. Same way it's not necessary to be a biologist in order to walk into a forest. Being a biologist just helps you in orientating yourself and probably not get poisoned by plants. But at the end of the day, either way, you can find your way there. And that's also one big thing I always hold against the argument of being self-taught versus being taught. That's such a gross oversimplification. Like you said, you met people like from native communities, for instance.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go as far as say that like people like tribes in the Amazonian rainforest are self-taught on the forest there. They probably know it better than any biologist without being able to say the Latin words, I guess. So it's similar for music, as long as you deal with an ecosystem, and as sooner you start with it, the more you're going to learn. And whether you call it C major or you call it, hey, I wrote this song because I felt X, Y, Z, that's just, how should you say, that's just like fine details at the very end of it. And I feel like that's also something I would be grateful if I would be able to give it to people, to just dare to tap into their own musicality, because there's so much more than one thinks. But I think we all have seen a few too many geniuses up on big stages that people won't even recognize when they stand in a subway, for instance,
Mm. Mm. You're evoking a memory of when I was living in Montreal, and this guy was just playing a recorder, like just a basic recorder, and he was so good. It was just he was a genius. Like he was just playing his heart's content, and people just passing by, not really listening. I was listening to him, and he was just, he had such a love of that instrument, you could tell. And to me, like there's music in everything. Even I think my first instrument was the pots and pans. And if anything, I really wish that this conversation evokes that remembrance of just loving to do something as reason enough to do it. And I think you gave such a beautiful lens for that in the way that you articulate. Because when I think of creating these environments where that allows that genius to be heard, I feel like that to me is really interesting in terms of what we're co-creating as a society. I envision community centers being spaces that are really like this from the people, by the people, creating focal points where we can shine our gifts, whatever that is, if it's musical or creative, and
Mm.
getting out of this rut of like um always chasing the outcome, but really being present in the moment. I feel like that'll be a mark of a more enlightened society when we can all listen with open minds and ears and hearts to these, because this is what I noticed with music. There's often, I mean, this is probably an oversimplification, but in watching people, observing people, how people respond, especially in like social conditions, like maybe bars or whatever, people respond to recognition more than they respond to novelty. Often it's like that music, like people, you put on Sweet Home Alabama and everyone's like, ah, Sweet Home Alabama. But like a new song that's really deep and touching and just, it maybe takes a while. It's like it takes the willingness of someone to listen to the newness to really
Mm.
appreciate it. And that's something I feel like our society has maybe not encouraged so much as, just following those patterns. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's actually a pretty interesting point because, on the one hand, one thing I learned is that our brain always seeks novelty to some degree. That's
Hmm.
like one of the main factors I teach when it comes to, or I use when it comes to writing music, for instance. It's just when you have to be aware when people would probably zone out with listening and then introduce contrast to hook them again with novelty, that's like the
Hmm.
basic process. However, when it comes to familiar songs, it's actually the opposite. It's more like, hey, they replaced my favorite food on the menu, or they replaced my favorite
Hmm.
actor in the movie with this new guy. What is this? I don't like it, and then you get to know it. Okay, it's fine. So
Hmm.
actually, that might highlight songs also to be like friends or an entity almost.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting because I mean, we all know like for if someone doesn't do a cover song well or they try to mimic, unless it's to me like cover songs that are not done extremely well or very novel, they
Mm,
just ruin the song for me. So it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition there.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Well, I mean,
definitely.
I mean, I feel like we could probably have a much longer, more robust conversation, Clem, but I'm also mindful of your time, and I would like to know how can people get more connected to what you're doing? What's the best way of like listening to your music, of connecting with you in community? How do you like to connect with people?
I have a YouTube channel, for instance, where I post my process. Sometimes I post lessons, sometimes I post my own music as well. Then you can check out my school community, Fretboard Artist. Maybe you can drop the link somewhere below in the description so
Yep,
people
we'll
can
do.
click it and find it. That's a place where people can just hang out and start to get creative and watch this whole thing growing. And apart from that, Triptonos Chado, we are on most social media platforms, currently leaving Spotify, but on everything else you can find us as well. If you are
Mm.
in Europe, you probably can see us play live at some point too.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Clem. I really appreciate all the work that you do and the depth of your appreciation of music and your skill and your growing skill as a teacher and community builder. I always love asking our inspiring guests, if you had a megaphone, magic megaphone, and you can talk to the whole world and everyone could hear you, what would you share?
Hmm. That's a very good, very surprising question. Let me think. Loading bar back. Now, how should I? Well, maybe I would ask them to find the next body of water and take a look at their own reflection. Then
Hmm.
ask who they really see. That would be the deep one.
Hmm. I love that. Yeah.
I think that another good thing everybody should hear on the planet right now is like whatever you're doing, just can you please slow down by 10 times for a change? That would be a good one.
That's a great point. I heard this a lot from elders when I was working at in a college. We'd have guest elders come in, and I always love this. They say, when the times speed up, it's really important to slow down.
Yeah.
And I think more than ever now, that's really important. I think so many people are running to some finish line and they don't even realize where they're running to. And I've had a few interviews with different technologists and AI people in the show, and I talk a lot about the need for as technology accelerates, we need to rise in our spiritual maturity, whatever that means to you. But I think you've illustrated a lot in terms of our capacity, our ability to listen, and to create our own mind and meaning around some of these connections. That maturity, however it looks to each of us, I think is really important. So when you talk about slowing down, that's what I hear. Clem, is there anything you'd like to share with our audience before I invite our daughter? It's been a real pleasure having you on the show. You're really an awesome person to talk with.
Thank you. Thanks so much for a great question, and thanks for having me. I would say, in spirit of the conversation we had today, if anybody listening to this has a hunch or a slight feeling that they might want to pick up an instrument, just do it. It doesn't cost much, but momentum exists in the moment, not in the future. And now if you have a momentum, use it. And if you feel like listening to one of your favorite albums, listen to it. And if you feel like watching that band out at some place, maybe some friends of you playing somewhere, then definitely go there. And lastly, if you want to support people who make music, try buying their albums instead of just relying on streaming services as well. Yeah. Those couple of cents really can make a difference, and it really helps of keeping people independent from big corporations. And independence helps in connecting again, I'd say.
Really wonderful perspectives and encouragement, Clem. Yeah, I love that. Momentum exists in the moment, not in the future. That's awesome. And yeah, definitely supporting local artists. It's funny. I'm still a CD collector. I just love having albums, right? So I mean, nowadays it's kind of easy to find albums for like $1. But I hear what you're saying. Even online, those album sales. We've supported some of our friends. We had Winsome Kind on the show. They do a lot of like music that's really about bringing in the new earth, and they've literally shipped CDs to us, so we have the albums physically, and I feel like that's it's really important that we support one another. So thanks for that beautiful reminder, man. And anytime you want to come and promote what you're doing, just let us know. Yeah, music is so important, I think, for this next era that we're entering in terms of building something meaningful that we can get behind, and reminding one another to pay attention, to listen, and to slow down like you reminded us. So thanks, brother. Really appreciate you and the work that you're doing.
Thanks a lot. Most welcome. Thanks for having me. And let's keep in touch.
Sounds
see
good,
where
brother.
the path leads.
Sounds great. All right. On that note, I'm going to invite our daughter, Luciana, to say thanks for watching. And Clem, to all of your listeners and to your bandmates and all those you touch through your teaching, highest blessings and best wishes, and look forward to chatting again soon. Thank you.
Take care. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thanks for watching. You say ciao ciao.
Bye.
I love you so much.